Hello and welcome to an emergency edition of the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I'm Nathan Brown, Colts insider with the Indianapolis Star, joined by my co-host and co-worker, Joel A. Erickson. This wasn't a planned episode. I don't know that we necessarily expected to be taping anything today. We will, of course, have our normal episode coming to you guys tomorrow afternoon to talk more, maybe trade deadline fallout, as well as the Colts as they are readying for a trip across the pond to Berlin to face the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday. But this emergency episode this evening is all about the Colts blockbuster trade, sending 2 first-round picks and second-round pick from 2024, A.D. Mitchell, to the New York Jets to get two-time All-Pro, two-time Pro Bowler, and 2022 Defensive Rookie of the Year, Sauce Gardner. Joel, when this came across social media and got alerted to this today, initial reaction from you, what were you thinking?
The funny part about this is we were on Zooms with the coordinators. So there's like a weird part of this where, like, if you want to know what Lou Anarumo thinks about this, we were about 7-ish minutes too late.
Yeah.
Brian Mason was talking, and when Brian Mason talks, he tends to do like a very long intro, which I love because he gives us a ton of detail. And I thought I was going to write something off of it, and then the next thing I know, you put in the chat or in our Indy Star chat that the Colts made a trade, and I was already in to ask a question, and almost didn't ask the question because I couldn't think of what I was going to say because I was busy texting people to confirm it.
Yeah.
Which takes a little bit of time. Yeah. I didn't see Sauce Gardner coming. A little more behind the scenes for people. You also put in the chat this morning, we might have a podcast today, depending on who they sign. And our discussion was, well, the player would have to be big enough. Mm-hmm. And then they got the biggest name at the deadline.
Yeah. And they tossed in A.D. Mitchell, which I hadn't thought about. I can't remember the reporter whose story proposed
Jonathan Jones.
There you go. Jonathan Jones from CBS Sports, a great nugget in one of his recent trade pieces, mentioning the prospect of the Colts, who had an incredibly crowded pass catcher room, between Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, Tyler Warren, the list of guys who, go back and forth between offense and special teams, depending on what's going on. And of course, A.D. Mitchell, who I think has caught 2 passes since that fateful day in Los Angeles on September 28th, when he played a big role in 14 points coming off the board for the Colts and what turned out to be a 7-point loss to the Rams. That was their only loss of the season up until Sunday. He had at least not been benched anymore, but certainly had seemed like he had lost favor from Shane Steichen, and we weren't really sure if that was ever coming back. He is part of this trade, along with 2 first-round picks, to land this blockbuster deal. What was the first of several deals that the Jets made today? I don't know. It was the type of deal that we just haven't seen the Colts under Chris Ballard make ever since he'd been the GM, starting in January 2017. We'd talked and written about ad nauseum about how they'd made just a single trade deadline move, and it was a swap of running backs and not something that was really all that consequential, but also that this was the first time in quite a long time that the Colts had even remotely been mentioned in Super Bowl conversations. They haven't won the AFC South in 11 years. They haven't been to the Super Bowl since early 2010, and they find themselves now, even after Sunday's loss, still holding on to, via tiebreaker, the number 1 seed in the AFC. They face an increasingly tougher schedule over this second half and have a roster that we can get into in a second that really has probably a 1 or 2 year window when you start to look at some of the contracts that are coming up at the end of 2026 and even the end of this season, and the added money that it would likely take to keep some of those players. So this is a guy that the Colts get in Sauce Gardner that admittedly has not had quite the numbers. When you just purely look at stats that he started with his first 2 years in the league, particularly his first year in the league, led the NFL in passes defended, I believe, with 20, had 2 picks that year, first team All-Pro, defensive rookie of the year, but certainly still a reason why the Colts felt like he was worth 2 first-round picks, the likes of a trade deadline trade that we haven't seen since the Rams dealt 2 first-round picks and a 4th-round pick for Jalen Ramsey to the Jacksonville Jaguars back in 2019. So this is not a trade deadline deal that you oftentimes see. We oftentimes don't really even see first-round picks included at all, and the Colts felt like first round picks in 2026 and 2027 were worth parting with in order to get a player that I imagine they feel like could potentially be their one player away type guy to lead them on a big postseason charge this year.
Yeah, it's really hard to know where to start because you can break this down in a lot of different ways. Let's start with the compensation. Okay, so on the surface, it's Micah Parsons' level of compensation because it's 2 first-round picks. It's a player. Now, once we break this down, though, I'm not sure it is Micah Parsons level compensation, and that's going to sound insane. So stay with me here for a while, podcast listeners. Gardner was already signed. The Colts did not have to do the contract. There was no contract work that had to be done. The Jets signed him in June. June! Nathan was still covering IndyCar and had no idea that the Colts beat would be open in June.
Alex Palou had basically clinched the IndyCar championship at that point, but the season still had 8 or 9 races to go. We
at that point didn't know that Daniel Jones was going to win the job or was let alone the favorite or any of that stuff. We know anything about that in June. They signed him in June. So the contract was already done. I don't know if this is exactly how they look at it, but this is me drawing on some conversations with NFL people, some of my knowledge with other sports. The fact that he's under control for 5.5 years adds to his value, typically. Typically in most sports, if the player is under control longer, that adds to their value. So,
in part because, this was a deal that set the market at cornerback. This was the top deal that any cornerback had ever gotten. Average annual value just over $30 million to reset the market from Derek Stingley Jr.'s deal with Houston. And this was a deal that didn't even need to be done yet. It was 2 years early. He still had 2 more seasons left to play in his current deal, and that's why the Colts have him for more than 5 years, which is a wild thing to think of and something I don't think you see often in the NFL.
Okay, so here's where it's going to get a little wonky. Micah Parsons, obviously the Packers gave him a new deal, correct? Mm-hmm. After the trade. So 2 first-round picks. So you're like, well, Joel, it doesn't matter who negotiates the deal. It's the same level of control, blah, 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 blah. It's not. Here's the reason. The Colts got themselves out of a significant amount of money on the cap hit because the signing bonus paid does not come over with the trade. I did not mean to rhyme there, but I did. The signing bonus does not come with the trade. Therefore, the Jets did incur some of this contract themselves, some of the guaranteed money themselves. There's a penalty for that, and I think the Colts paid a first-round pick for that difference, essentially. Whereas the Packers gave 2 first-round picks up front, and then also dealt with all of the signing bonus and all of the contract they signed. So I think that is somewhat of the difference in the deals. I think the other piece of the difference in the deal is the player. I do think Kenny Clark had more value than A.D. Mitchell. Not by a lot, because A.D. Mitchell still has 2 years left. But I think he has more value because he's a more accomplished player in the league. I wrote this earlier today, and we're going to get into A.D. Mitchell, I think, somewhere in the back end of this podcast. I think we should talk more about that. But also, he does not have 500 yards in the NFL yet. Yeah. And Kenny Clark has been a Pro Bowler. So,
there's probably something to, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the way I'm thinking about it is, if you trade Micah Parsons and then you're the Packers, you have to do a deal with him in order to keep him around long term. that probably in some ways gives Parsons a little bit more leverage probably with the Colts. Whereas Sauce Gardner was, doing a deal just to stay with the team that he'd been with, the place where he'd been comfortable, the first place that was going to be able to offer him any sort of deal, the team that was going to be able to make him the highest paid player in the league at that position at that moment. I wonder if that too, plays something into potentially, the Colts just getting a little bit better deal and someone else making this, signing off on this contract 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah, I think the loss of the signing bonus and everything plays into why it was so much. The other piece of this, and this is where we get to Sauce Gardner, the player. As recently as right before the season, ESPN did a poll of like 70-something executives on who the best corners in the NFL are. And Gardner was 5th, even after last year. I think everyone knows that the Jets were very different last year after Robert Saleh got fired. Their defense went from being really good to really bad, like almost instantly, in a way we haven't seen. So that plays a part of it. And people still considered him a top 5 corner in the NFL. The other 4 in front of him, in case people are wondering, well, why did we get Sauce Gardner? Why didn't we go get one of those guys? 2 of them are not available because their teams are probably going to the playoffs. Patrick Surtain and of the Broncos and Trent McDuffie of the Chiefs. Those 2 are not available. The number 2 player on that list was Stingley. He's not available because Texans probably still think they can make the playoffs, and also the Texans are not sending the Colts the number 1 corner.
And the Texans have what you probably argue the number 1 defense in the league right now.
The number 1 defense in the league right now. They probably still think they have a chance at the playoffs. And again, they're not sending the number 1 corner to the Colts, not unless Cal McNair gets really drunk on tequila one night at Ninfa on Navigation. That's the only thing I could think of that would work. The 4th corner that they had above him was Denzel Ward from Cleveland. Denzel Ward's contract does kind of match up. I don't know if the Browns are interested in moving him or not. I don't think so. But also he's older. He is under control for a while, but he's older. He's 28, whereas Gardner is 25. And I think that's another big piece of Sauce Gardner as a player here. He's 25.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not when corners like this come available. We haven't gotten to the edge rusher thing yet, so I don't want to get too focused on it. I think the Colts are betting that Gardner has just essentially been dragged down by the absolute chaos around him and being stuck in a bunch of different systems, and that once he gets back in a team that's really playing for something, he's going to play. The other piece of him as a player, and I'm sure you've got some stuff on this too, there's some underlying numbers that suggest to me that some of Gardner's fall off is a little bit overblown. So the rating stuff is just that he hasn't picked off a pass this year and he's given up 2 touchdowns. His catch percentage, or the completion percentage on throws against him, according to Next Gen Stats, is 57.1. That's in line with where he's been before in the NFL. He's around similar numbers there. And then the other one, I think that a lot of people I've seen cited, I think this is important to know, is his tight window percentage on Next Gen Stats, which basically is just saying a throw where the corner is in really good position, is 62%. That's very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of those numbers, like for instance, last year, if you look at him, his completion percentage was right around the same, 55. Tight window percentage was 35.3. That's in the chaos of that year. So 2023, the last time he was an All-Pro, his tight window percentage was 35.1. Catch percentage was 57.9. And as a rookie, his tight window percentage was actually 31. And the catch percentage was 48. So he's kind of actually, some of the underlying numbers suggest he's actually been in closer coverage. This is also his lowest average separation per target by a full yard of his career. So some of the numbers would just suggest that Gardner is not as far off as some of the overarching numbers would say.
Yeah, and I think there's something to the idea. You look at that number from his rookie year on passes defended, led the league at 20. You are a young guy coming into the league. Yes, he was highly touted. He was the 4th overall pick in the first round of the draft by the Jets in 2022. But you are a lot more likely to be targeted by quarterbacks and teams and offenses who are wanting to test you or don't believe that you can be consistent with what they saw on film the last couple of weeks, and that you can truly do that week in and week out. And so he got lots of chances to break up lots of balls, and obviously did well enough to be named the Defensive Rookie of the Year and an All-Pro first teamer. I think I saw somewhere, I believe it was an ESPN stat that he said he's the only cornerback since the NFL AFL merger in the early 1970s to be named All Pro each of his first 2 seasons. So that's the kind of rarity and the kind of skill that we're talking about that he showed early on in his career. As you progress, and especially if you're on a defense that has some holes, particularly at cornerback, teams can start to learn and figure out ways to just avoid throwing at you or around you, whether it's experimenting with matchups or moving guys around, what have you. And I have to imagine, having not been admittedly a frequent Jets football watcher the last couple of years, I have to imagine that there's some of that too. That after the league sees what you do in a year, they can kind of game plan and figure things out and find ways to work around you. And particularly when you're on a weaker defense that, as you mentioned earlier, really fell apart after Robert Saleh left in the middle of last year, and one that has not been very good this year for a 1-7 Jets team. It becomes, I think, a lot more difficult to have the type of impact that he had in his first couple of seasons. And now he joins a Colts secondary that is quickly healing up. He'll have Jalen Jones, who returned this past weekend, held DK Metcalf to 2 catches for 6 yards in his first game starting at corner this season. Hopefully in a couple weeks, they will have Trevarius Ward, a fellow all-pro corner in his own right, opposite Sauce. And that's where we start to get into the place where you can have an argument that the Colts have go from probably having one of the weaker secondaries in the league to having one of the more talented secondaries in the league if Ward indeed heals up, gets through concussion protocol over the next couple weeks, and ideally is on the field to help this Colts team out against Patrick Mahomes in a road game against the Chiefs on November 23rd.
Side note, I have a Jalen Jones solution if both Gardner and Ward are available. We're just going to throw this in the podcast now because I don't know where else to put it. Remember last week when Lou Anarumo was talking about tight ends and how you can't really cover them with linebackers anymore and can't really cover them with safeties anymore, and you love to have a corner who could do it. What if I told you that there is a 6'2", 200-pound, very physical corner who just became available?
Yeah, and who just stopped one of the more physical receivers in the league this year or this past weekend. Yeah,
matchups. Mm-hmm. And also Lou wants to play a lot of dime.
And then you've got Mekhi Blackmon who can do what he does best in just kind of playing that speedster role and not having to be a traditional starting corner who's playing boatload of snaps every single week like he has been the last several too.
Yep. It's anyway, so it just opens up the matchup so much. I think this is maybe this is the place to talk about this. It's hard because there's a lot of different tendrils this can take. I don't know if we're hitting any of them the way I want to, but oh well. It was a very fast day. The other thing about this is the Colts have been telling us for about a year that cornerback is really important in this defense. Chris Ballard, who for years had just drafted guys and made some moves around the edges and not necessarily gone hard after the cornerback position, went big in free agency, signed the number 1 corner in free agency. He added depth. It didn't work out, but he added depth with Corey Ballantyne. He spent a 3rd-round pick on Justin Wally, even though he had Juju Brents and Jalen Jones in the building already. And then when things got bad in training camp injury-wise, instead of resting on the fact that he had players in camp who had played starting snaps for them before, like Sam Womack, who's now in Tennessee, he started 8 games for the Colts last year. And a handful of those games he looked half decent in. And instead of just resting on that and going, well, we've got Womack, we can play him there. We can wait till Jalen Jones comes back. He goes out and signs Xavier Howard, which, again, did not work, but it's a swing. It's a swing at a Pro Bowl, at a guy who's been a Pro Bowler, been an all-pro type. Didn't work at all. He was cooked, but he tried. And then trades a 6th-round pick to get Blackman, which he's made some of those trades in the past before, but trades it to kind of replace Justin Wally as the speed guy. And so you just see, like, all offseason, they've been trying to buttress this position. And then I think the other piece of this that tells us how much they value the cornerback position was Lou Anarumo a couple weeks ago when he was talking about his defense and whether or not they were a bend but don't break defense and his philosophy and stuff like that. Essentially said, I don't want to be bend but don't break. When you have the corners we have, things are going to happen. And he said, I don't put it on those guys. Like, they're young guys and they're learning and they're doing their best, but young guys are going to make mistakes, essentially saying that some of the reason that they're giving up so much passing yards is they're just not good enough at corner. Mm-hmm. You put all that together and it tells you why I think they wanted a corner and went after corners. We know that they went after at least 2 others based on they checked in on at least 2 others based on reporting. Cam Taylor-Britt in Cincinnati, Alante Taylor in New Orleans. I would say both of those were backup options just based on the fact that they got Sauce Gardner. But, people were saying, is it corner, is it edge rusher, is it corner, is it edge rusher? I think they've been telling us that they think it's corner. Now, you can disagree with that if you want, but I think the team is telling us what they think.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, I mean, you and I were talking about this before we got the podcast started today. Ultimately, you can look at what was said, in the closing hours today on, this team is only willing to deal this person for this pick or that pick. And I think sometimes it gets a little clouded on who was actually available and who just seemed like he was available, but ultimately it was going to take something that was an extreme overpay to get a deal done. I mean, I will admit I was in the camp of feeling like edge rusher was the way to go, large in part because I felt like the type of corners that we thought were available, as you mentioned, the Cam Taylor-Britts, the Reek Willens, other players in that caliber that, maybe you deal somewhere between a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick for. I just didn't feel like that was going to make a notable enough difference on this team to do something that was going to get you over the hump. It was almost more so someone that, could solidly fill in the role, say if Travarius Ward doesn't come back from the IR, if these concussion symptoms continue to linger on and he's not able to make it through protocol. Sauce Gardner is someone who can make a difference. He is a guy. And I felt like maybe there were, if you were thinking about guys who could make some sort of a notable impact, I felt like there were probably more edge rushers to be had there, but I don't know that there was anyone truly impactful at the level the Sauce Gardner can be for your secondary. And as you mentioned, having a much improved secondary will then help out your guys on the edge and guys on the defensive line as a whole to work as a better, more impactful, more effective, cohesive unit.
Yeah, I think the other thing is I have a story posting on this in the morning. I don't know, most of you are probably listening to it after it's already posted, so you've probably already seen this. But, ultimately, I believe that if it's the same, if it's the same level edge rusher versus the same level corner, I would go with the edge rusher every time. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I think it's the most important position on the defense. Number two, because you can scheme away from a corner easier than you can scheme away from a pass rusher, a truly great pass rusher. Just watch a Packers game. Just watch what people do to Micah Parsons and the fact that he still does stuff, and you can kind of see that. Whereas, like, a corner, you can just not throw it at him if you want. The other reason is that outside of 4 or 5 guys over the course of NFL history, cornerback is pretty volatile. it's hard to be the same level of cornerback for 10 years. You have guys who have 4 or 5 year runs, but like Deion Sanders, Darrelle Revis, like that's a level of cornerbacking that's really, really hard to get to. Whereas I feel like edge rushers, great pass rushers, if they don't get hurt, they're very, very good for like at least a decade.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of how the two positions work. So all things equal, if it's the same level of player, yes, I would take the edge rusher. But who was the same level of player? The Raiders weren't trading Max Crosby. Cleveland wasn't trading Myles Garrett. I don't think Trey Hendrickson counts because he's 31. He's got a bad hip right now. That scares me.
And he was only under contract for the next half of this year.
He's only under contract for the next half of this year. He's a rental. The best pass rusher that went, even some of the guys that people talked about that were lesser names, weren't actually available. Bradley Chubb didn't go. Jermaine Johnson from the Jets did not go in their fire sale. And I was actually told before the deadline that he wasn't available. I didn't report that because you never know. You don't want to report that and then someone's like, I'll give a second-round pick or a first-round pick for Jermaine Johnson, and they trade him. But that was what I was told, was that he's not even really available. So, like, it felt like all these edge rushers were available. But in reality, the only one – correct me if I'm wrong – the only ones that moved today were Jalen Phillips, Joe Tryon, and was there another one?
Those are the two that I'm thinking of. So unless someone else went while we were
furiously the 49ers got a former second-round pick last week that the Patriots didn't want.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last time to do this was Parsons. I think that the Colts, could offer a similar package to what the Packers offered for the Parsons. Here's the thing. Things have changed in Indianapolis.
Yeah, they didn't realize. Well, I mean, maybe they hoped they were, but I don't know that. And you go into a season thinking or hoping you're going to be a Super Bowl contender, but until you play a couple games, you don't know. I don't know how many people in that building would have realistically bet that they were going to be 7-2 after 9 games.
If you expand it to the entire October-November trades, other edge rushers that went, Odafe Owa went to the Chargers. That's nope. In terms of like a real difference maker. And then the other one is Draymond Jones, who went to Baltimore from Tennessee. Mm-hmm. I think we all know why that wasn't an option. Also, I don't think I've said anybody's name that you're like, that guy definitively has the potential to change the defense.
No, I mean, Jalen Phillips is probably as close as it gets. And again, this is a guy who somewhat similarly to Sauce Gardner, like really stood out as a rookie. But the difference between Jalen Phillips and Sauce Gardner is the last 2 years, Phillips has been coming back from both a torn Achilles and a torn ACL. Just not going to be a guy that's going to be nearly as powerful and impactful on a defense, even though he has, made some good plays. He's, stands out at times on a pretty rough Miami Dolphins defense. I just don't think a guy, even though they're roughly the same age, is going to be able to be as impactful or have a chance in a new scenery, in a new situation with a new defensive coordinator and system, have a chance to, you would maybe argue in some ways, get revitalized or re-energized in a way where I feel like Sauce Gardner can. Yeah,
well, like you have an all-pro level of Sauce Gardner's play. If you look at Jalen Phillips, the way he's playing this year, it's in line with his previous production. He has 3 sacks. He led the Dolphins with 29 pressures. The thing I think he could have added to you is that he's got a lot of quick pressures, so pressures in under 3 seconds. The Colts are missing that. But outside of that, if you look at 3 sacks, 29 quarterback pressures, it sounds a lot like Latu.
Mm-hmm.
Latu has 5 sacks now, but coming into last week, that would sound a lot like Latu. I just don't think Jalen Phillips comes in and is a Micah Parsons level weapon.
No, definitely not.
He doesn't change your pass rush. He gives you a different flavor, but he doesn't change your pass rush entirely, which is why the Eagles only gave up a 3rd-round pick for him.
Yes.
The Colts were clearly willing to give up a lot for the right player. And that's the other thing. It's like, if someone's like, well, they didn't try hard enough to get the edge rusher. They were willing to give up 2 first-round picks and a second-round receiver, a former second-round receiver who has 2 more years of team control. They were willing to go to the mattresses.
Yeah.
If they couldn't get someone to part with one of those edge rushers, they weren't available.
I mean, yeah. I think that goes to tell you that Myles Garrett was not able to be had for 2 first-round picks, and Max Crosby was not available for 2 first-round picks, and that's where you are.
I'm trying to think where else to go with this. So I do think there's a couple ways this could go bad. Is this the part of the podcast for where this could go bad?
Yeah, I think we're 30 minutes in. I feel like we've done enough talking about this and why it could go well and why the Colts ultimately did this. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you the first one. I'll let you talk about it. The first one is obvious. Sauce Gardner isn't the player he was his first 2 years, or he gets hurt. So for 5.5 years, you're stuck with a bad contract. That's the first way, the obvious way.
Yeah.
What do you got?
Yeah, I mean that's a big risk, but ultimately the teams that win Super Bowls or go deep in the playoffs are teams that take risks sometimes. You're just not going to, in professional sports and the NFL, like you have to take some risks. There are something like this is just kind of what it takes, and the pluses, the potential of this ultimately I feel like outweighs that. But there is absolutely a situation where he gets here and you just kind of realize for whatever reason he starred those first couple years in the league. You just talked about like these guys on the corner. Yeah, I was looking through I think the last decade of all pro corners in the league just to figure out ultimately who is still around and what teams have 2 of them. The Colts are, I believe, one of just 4 teams in the league to have 2 all-pro corners on their roster right now. I think one of those teams has one of them on IR, the Cowboys. Another team, might have a player that's now playing safety. Like it's a really small group, but you learn from looking at that these guys, they'll stack up a handful of years, 2 or 3 years in that early chunk of their career as all pro or Pro Bowl. And it's really rare that they star more than that. And there are a lot of guys in there that are playing like 6, 7, 8 years in the league, and then they're done. Like not just, going from being stars in the league to being serviceable, like a star that shines so bright and then is just like out of the league. So there's absolutely a chance that is going to happen. I don't know that that's likely. I still feel like a player who's just 4 years into his career is going to have something left to show. I think there's something about getting in a new situation, a place where he feels like the playoffs are a foregone conclusion this year, and there's a very real chance that he could play a major role on a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. And I think even if he's not an all-pro again, you got better on defense. I don't think there's really any way outside of a terrible injury that he suffers a couple games into his Colts tenure. I just don't see a way in which this team is getting better with this move. Not getting better with this move.
One of the other things I think about is, we talked a lot before you got on the beat about what can Chris Ballard change to change his narrative here. And one of the things that he's been really bad at, just being honest, he's not been good at drafting corners.
Mm-hmm.
He's gotten guys who are kind of starters, maybe number 2s. He's had a lot of busts. Just frankly, Juju Brents is already gone. He is not playing for the Dolphins. Like he's struggled to draft corners. So if you struggle to draft corners over 8 years, maybe just go get the one you've already seen play. He's been better at that. Xavier Rhodes looked really good for a year here. They were good at, and he was old, and they were good at identifying that he would have something to play for. Stephon Gilmore looked really good here. He's been much better with known commodities than he has been with draft picks. Maybe this is him acknowledging that.
It's a great point. I think there's absolutely something to that. Ultimately, they've succeeded in lots of other different places on this roster. I mean, you go through their entire starting lineup on offense outside of Daniel Jones are guys that Chris Ballard has drafted. Some of them recently, some of them longer term veteran type guys. So I don't think ultimately that's something that you want to figure out. You want to try and figure out why whether it's Chris Ballard or coaches on the staff or analysts or assistants just haven't been able to pick that piece apart and identify guys who are going to succeed in this league and guys who can be transformed from rookies into every week starters who can be impactful. But they've now got 2 All-Pros in Travarius Ward and Sauce Gardner, and a solid guy, as you mentioned earlier, and Jalen Jones, who can play in matchups along with Mekhi Blackman. Like, hopefully, ideally, this is a position that you don't have to worry about now for a little while with some of the moves that they've made over the last 12 months.
Okay, you mentioned the second way that this could go bad. In that answer, it's Daniel Jones. Because now you don't have first-round picks the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. If he turns into a pumpkin and looks like the Jones we saw in Pittsburgh last week, that's the way this goes bad, that you gave up all your assets. I don't necessarily think that's 100% wrong, because we don't know how he's going to be. We don't know. I would say that if you're looking at him as a Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold type, those 2 guys had some hiccups, but have generally played well since they had their ascension to being a legitimate starting quarterback in the league again. So you're betting on that. You're betting on Shane Steichen's belief in Daniel Jones, that he's going to be a different player. But that's another way that this could go bad, is if Daniel Jones only had 8 good games in him, and now he's going to not be good going forward, because you did give up the picks that would have given you a chance to maybe draft somebody.
Yeah, I wrote in a piece that's coming out tomorrow morning, it's kind of like a 5 thoughts piece, and one of those pieces is or one of those thoughts that I had that I expanded on in there is just the idea that they are really kind of tied for better or worse to Daniel Jones. The for better of that idea is that he's on a 1-year, $14 million contract right now. And if this run for the Colts continues, if Sunday's road loss to the Steelers, where Jones was credited with 5 turnovers, turns out to be an aberration, then he is going to cost a lot more than $14 million next year. Those guys that you mentioned there, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, even Geno Smith, who's obviously having a down year with the Raiders, like those guys that have kind of been journeyman quarterbacks in the league that needed to go to a new team to kind of revitalize their careers, to find themselves, to prove ultimately that they could be legitimate starters in this league. Those types of quarterbacks are getting somewhere between $33 and $38 million a year on multi-year deals right now. So as you add someone like Sauce Gardner, who right now, I know you detailed the rest of this year is only making $625,000 on the Colts books. And even next year, his cap hit is, I think, only $9.5 million, and goes up even only to like 20 million for 2027. But this starts to get to be an expensive deal. And when you look at some of these other contracts that the Colts either have on the books right now, or deals like Daniel Jones, who's going to have to get re-signed this year, and if things are going well, is going to cost more than he did this year. Someone like Alec Pierce, whose deal is up after this year, and who, if his season continues as it is going on, I think he's 23rd in passing yards in the league right now through 9 games, is one of the best deep threats in the league. He's going to go for a lot more than the couple $1 million that the Colts are paying him this year. So you're starting to build a team that very quickly is going to get really expensive, and you're going to start having to make some tough decisions. But it's kind of the price of getting someone like this. You start to approach the Super Bowl window, but that's only going to be able to last for a couple of years. I don't have the list right in front of me. I can find it in just a second. But the number of players, when you look at, say, like the top 10 or 11 contracts that the Colts have on the books right now in terms of their cap hits. I think 2/3 of them are up after next season. So when you're thinking about Sauce Gardner being more expensive, Daniel Jones, if he's around, if he proves himself the rest of this year, going to be more expensive. If they're able to find a way to keep Alec Pierce, it's going to start to be really tough to keep this nucleus of a team around beyond the end of 2026. And so you're starting to look at, we kind of have 2 years to figure this out. To obviously you want to win a Super Bowl, but even to make a deep run where you start to feel like we did something, this move made sense. We took a step, and now we're having to juggle the difficulties that other teams in the league, like the Eagles or the Chiefs, the Rams, teams that are used to getting far in the playoffs over the last several years, the type of things and the decisions that they go through to figure out ways to stay competitive among the top tier of folks in this league. That was one of the big things that stood out to me, and one of the effects ultimately of getting a guy like Sauce Gardner, who I think the final 2 years of his deal has a cap hit of like $36 million.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting because it's a little bit different than the way they've operated in the past. That's I think where the most interesting thing is. It does lead to some questions. I think we're going to evaluate all those. Alec Pierce is a good way to get into the A.D. Mitchell discussion. We'll have the A.D. Mitchell discussion. I think right now. I think one of the things that sticks out to me, and this is kind of what I wrote. I wrote something on this after he was traded away. Well, number one, why would A.D. there are some people who would say, why is A.D. Mitchell attracted to other teams? He's a wildly athletic separator who has 2 years of team control left after this season. So that's a simple piece there. Why the Colts were willing to move on from him, knowing all that stuff, knowing that Reggie Wayne likes him, knowing that assistant coach Reggie Wayne likes him a lot. You think about where the Colts were when they drafted him. Alec Pierce at that time was known as somebody who could get deep, but the production had not been consistent. They drafted A.D. Mitchell thinking if he develops and Pierce doesn't take the next step, in 2 years, Pierce can move on and we'll stick with A.D. Mitchell. The other thought was if he develops, maybe, I think probably without saying it, maybe we can move on from Michael Pittman eventually, and A.D. Mitchell becomes the number one receiver. Here's the problem. None of that stuff worked out that way for A.D. Mitchell.
No.
Pittman looks good again. He's very valuable to this team from a leadership and grit and fire standpoint. On top of that, he's been a better touchdown scorer with Daniel Jones than ever. He's back to being that physical presence that you need. And then Pierce, I think Pierce is the real problem for A.D. Mitchell right now. It's just Alec Pierce has not just taken one step, but he's taken like 2 or 3 as a receiver and can do a lot of different things. And he's reliable. Yeah. And that's the ultimate thing. I think a lot of people look at A.D. Mitchell and go, they shouldn't. Why would you trade a guy just because he fumbled the ball through the end zone in Los Angeles? They didn't do it because of that. They did it because that was the final and biggest of a string of mistakes for A.D. Mitchell to this point. And I think he just feels like it just felt like he lost the trust of the coaching staff.
I mean, that along with once you get buried in this, pass catching group on this team, it's just, there are only so many plays, there are only so many touches to go around. When you've got a guy like Michael Pittman and a receiver like Alec Pierce, who are both capable, as we saw on Sunday, of getting well over 100 yards and both legitimately impacting this game in different ways. Yes, this was the game that the Colts ultimately lost. Yes, this was the first game that they've had even one 100-yard receiver this year, but there have been plenty of moments this season when they haven't been getting 100-yard, registering 100-yard performances, that both of these players have been impactful and need to be on the field. And when you throw in the fact that Tyler Warren, who is getting a lot of talk about potentially being, an offensive rookie of the year candidate. You throw in a guy like Josh Downs, who caught a touchdown for the Colts on Sunday at Pittsburgh. Like, it's just hard to reason why AD Mitchell should be, on a higher rung than any of those four guys in terms of guys who you should be looking for earlier in the passing game. And so when he goes to a team like New York, he's just going to have more opportunities to be on the field. He is ultimately not a player who is, who should be only getting 1 or 2 targets a game. He is better than that. He has, a higher ceiling than that. He's just a player, as you mentioned, that the Colts lost trust in, on a roster that has a lot of trustworthy, proven guys that they can go to first.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, I think if you want to, you would draw a, some people would probably want to draw a comp between Pierce and Mitchell and letting them, figure their stuff out rather than moving on from them. But there's differences there though. And one of the differences is that, the big question with Alec Pierce from a Colts standpoint was, have we ever given him a quarterback who can get him the football? Because Gardner Minshew, as people know who've listened to this podcast for a long time, didn't throw it. He wouldn't throw it. And then before the year before that, as a rookie, that was the chaos year with Matt Ryan and Sam Ehlinger, and Matt Ryan, and then Nick Foles, and then Sam Ehlinger, and then Matt Ryan. Like, there was just chaos there. And then I think the other piece of this that I think makes it different is that Alec Pierce had more than 500 yards in each of his first 2 seasons in the NFL. And people were like, we're not sure, right? AD Mitchell still doesn't have 500 yards in the NFL over his first 2 seasons, because, and maybe the difference there is that Pierce didn't have another version of Alec Pierce there to take snaps away from him, but Mitchell does. And so, like, I just don't know. It does feel like it means that Alec Pierce is getting re-signed, but I kind of felt like it was going that way anyway because of the way he was playing. And so it's interesting to think about. Like, I just don't think it's as one for one as people think it is. With Pierce, the question was, can people find him? Can he take the next step and be consistent in addition to being able to get deep? No one ever questioned that. Mitchell, he separates really well, but you can't just separate. You have to finish the play. And he just hasn't finished plays. We'd seen by the time the first 2 years were up, we'd seen Alec Pierce finish some plays. Jacksonville, his first year, some other big catches. Like, we'd seen him finish some plays. He just wasn't getting enough of them. Mitchell's been different. He's not finishing plays, whether it's catching deep balls or whether it's, making the right decision after with the ball in his hands.
Yeah. And, ultimately the Colts weren't faced with the opportunity to acquire someone like Sauce Gardner when they were in the first couple years of Alec Pierce's career there with the Colts. And, if obviously on the phone, I imagine the Colts don't throw in AD Mitchell in a trade like that unless it gets it across the finish line. I imagine they hadn't agreed on 2 first-round picks, and then the Colts were like, actually, we just really don't want to have AD Mitchell on our roster. You can have him, because there's still some benefit to having a guy like that, because you never know,
there's an injury.
Sure. Yeah, when Alec Pierce comes down with an injury on Sunday in Berlin, and ultimately AD Mitchell is your number 2 receiver. Like, there are things like that can happen. They've learned that the hard way at secondary this year. So, I just have to think that ultimately AD Mitchell was an important part of that trade package, and the Jets now get back a trade piece with potential on a roster that they clearly are, tearing down to the studs with all of their first and second round picks that they have over the last couple of years, and they're kind of just building from scratch. And there's maybe a potential that, just like some of those quarterbacks that we mentioned, that in a new situation, maybe a chance to mature and grow a little bit, that AD Mitchell can still be a reasonably solid player in this league. It's just not going to be with the Colts.
Well, and like, as for where the Jets would want him, I'm looking right now at their receiving numbers, and granted, they've had their own quarterback stuff going on there. They have Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is great. Their second leading receiver is Mason Taylor, the young tight end. Their third leading receiver in terms of both receptions and yards is Brees Hall, who plays running back. And then the next player has 14 catches for 117 yards. Just to put that in perspective, the internet will, if I can get to the right tab on the website, to get to somebody with less than 117 or 114 yards, or whatever I said, you have to go all the way down to, for the Colts, you have to go all the way down to Ashton Doolin with 4 catches for 58 yards. Michael Pittman, Tyler Warren, Josh Downs, Jonathan Taylor, and Alec Pierce all have at least 24 catches or more for this team. So you can see why the Jets would want him. The Jets are clearly headed into a rebuild where they like the other thing with the Jets, we haven't really talked a ton about the Jets. Like, people are like, oh, the Jets are tearing it down. Yeah, they don't have a quarterback.
Yeah. And now they have, I mean, what? Like, is it 5 number 1 picks or 5 first-round picks over the next 2 years? Like, they're going to go and get their guy over the next couple of years, and that's what they did with tearing down these pieces of their defense. And I'm sure they can probably still use some of those number 1 picks to re-up some of those positions and hope they hit on a guy that could be, you're not gonna bet that you're gonna get another Sauce Gardner, but you can hope that you can get someone that's even remotely comparable, and you've now got a quarterback, which is a massive thing in this league.
Well, and they hedge their bets a little bit too by getting, I think they have 3 in 2027 and 2 in 2026.
Yeah,
like if you look at this quarterback class, the way it's gone this year, it was supposed to be super deep, and it has just been a catastrophic college football season.
Yeah,
for first-round quarterback potentials. Guys getting hurt, guys playing terribly. Like it's Fernando Mendoza from IU or bust.
Yeah, like an IU quarterback is the top-ranked quarterback in this class right now, and I don't want to tear down Fernando Mendoza or IU football for that matter as an IU grad, but like that's where we are in the quarterback class. So.
And the other thing is like okay, you've got the 2 first-round picks and you can trade up for it. What if the Saints get the first pick?
Mm-hmm.
They're not trading it to you. They're just going to take Mendoza.
Yeah.
And so that's why you have all the picks in 2027. If you don't have a guy this year, you can come back next year and then you have something for the way the Jets are doing it makes sense to me. The way the Colts are doing it is admittedly aggressive. Like we still only have 8 games of Daniel Jones looking the way he is. But it also just most people wanted Chris Ballard to make a move that changes this defense. I've looked a couple times now while we've been podcasting this at the list of guys who got traded at this deadline. This is the only one that I think really changes the Colts defense.
Mm-hmm.
Quinnen Williams is great, but he plays defensive tackle. And the Colts have DeForest Buckner and they have Grover Stewart. And so I just think – yeah, I just think it's this was if you were going to take a big swing, this was the big swing. I don't know who else moved that I would have thought of as a big swing. I think there were some other guys out there that you maybe didn't have to invest as much in, and you get incrementally better. I think this one really raises the potential ceiling for this defense.
Yeah, the ceiling is higher with this move. Ultimately, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we don't know what Sauce Gardner is going to look like in this team. He's not had the last couple of years quite the production that you would maybe want for someone that you'd spend 2 first-round picks on if you're only looking at those first, this last season and a half or so, I would say. But that I think you can reason is a lot about the environment that he's been in, the system, the changes that are going on there, just what is going on in that organization at large. And nothing in this league is going to be 100%. And so when it comes down to it, I think you make an educated decision and you roll the dice and you see what this is going to turn into. The Colts, I just don't think the Colts were going to be able to stand pat and bet that the roster that they have, admittedly a strong roster, owners of the top seed in the AFC right now, odds were not going to be that team was probably going to be the one that comes out of the AFC this year. But when you're up against seasoned lineups like the Chiefs and the Bills, for example, who just have been there so many times, not to mention having to face quarterbacks like Josh Allen and like Patrick Mahomes. They went and did what they felt like was the best way to potentially get the most better. And they did that. And I think you have to give Chris Ballard a lot of praise for that.
Yep, it's very different. We're going to have a ton tomorrow. Do you have any more on this one? I think I might be out. I think I might be out of things.
No, I think I'm sure we'll learn more from talking to Coach Steichen tomorrow and players. Hopefully we get a chance to talk to Sauce Gardner tomorrow too. I'm really interested to talk to his friend and teammate at Cincinnati, Alec Pierce, who was there with him for a couple years. We'll get a chance to talk to Daniel Jones, kind of the leader of this team, to see what he feels like a move like this shows, and hopefully some other leaders on the defense as well. And I think tomorrow's podcast will have a lot more insight as to just what the folks around this team and this franchise feel about what this type of move could do for them long term.
Yeah. The interesting thing with Gardner is that he, I think, is still in the concussion protocol technically. And
yes. Well,
if people don't know this, the players in the concussion protocol are not allowed to do interviews, unlike players who are injured otherwise. So I'm very curious how that's going to go. Very, very curious.
Yeah, I think I remember reading somewhere that Aaron Glenn said that he was planning to return to practice this week. I believe so that he got injured and had his concussion and missed the Jets' last game, and then they had the bye week this past week. I believe Aaron Glenn said that he was going to return, and it sounded like he was likely to be able to play this week, but obviously you don't know until you go through that concussion protocol process. So that was uncertain. So maybe we don't get a chance to talk to Sauce Gardner tomorrow. Maybe it is on Thursday, or maybe you get a chance to get him as one of the few folks who are in Berlin on Friday among the myriad things that you'll be doing while you are jet lagged and have all sorts of chaos going on, hopping across the pond to cover the Colts game on Sunday in Berlin.
Yep. We'll be back tomorrow or today. I assume a lot of you are listening to this today. A lot of podcasts, but we also didn't know that Sauce Gardner was going to happen.
We did. Yeah. Just, if you're listening to this tomorrow afternoon, just, go back to back and get a nice couple hours of listening of Colts podcast for you. But yeah, we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Thanks for listening to this emergency edition of the Colts Cover 2 podcast.